Well, thank you for coming. I'm going to kick this off. So I'm Kevin Sellers from Intel, and I'm going to walk you through a little bit of a journey for us. And I've been to shows like this where the thinking is, what we didn't want to do is just show a bunch of work that we've done, because I've seen that before, and I don't know that it matters a whole lot to people. I think what might help is to give you a sense of where we've been and some of the challenges that our company and our brand is dealing with, and how we got to the point that we're at, and that process, that journey, some of the mistakes we made, some of the things that we did right. So I want to walk you through that and how it ties to this idea of how a brand and what it stands for can actually drive greater good. The thing that keeps me going and keeps me awake, actually wakes me up in the morning and gets me excited, is what Peter Drucker said. He said this back in 1954. And he talked about, in business, there are really only two things that matter: marketing and innovation. And I've always thought that was interesting, how he said marketing and innovation instead of innovation and marketing. So I've never had a chance to ask him why he said it in that order. But the point being, those are the two things in a business that actually drive results. You have to have something, a service, a product, something that people will want, and then you have to be able to communicate it really, really effectively. And that's what gets me excited as a marketer. But I want to give you a sense of kind of where we've been and some of the challenges we're facing, and how it shaped the changes we've made in our own marketing approach, and how, you know, what you'll hear from Mick and from Will in a minute really plays into this. Everybody knows Intel is a company that's associated with a personal computer. And the challenge for us, though, is that personal computers are really starting to lose in the marketplace. And the perception of Intel as a brand is that you equal the PC. And, you know, to kind of drive that point home, here's just a chart that just to give you a sense of the market that we service. And all those little blue bars at the bottom, that's the market we service. Now, it's still a big market. Still roughly about 1 million PCs are shipped a day. It's still a big market. But smartphones and tablets are kind of this new computing market of where all the excitement is. And we're not really a big player. We're a very small player in both of those markets. And so what was the dominant sort of way people interacted with the internet has now become a minority way that people interact with the internet, and it sort of caught us by surprise. You know, in addition to that, when you ask people what they think about Intel or what comes to mind when prompted, what comes to mind is the computer. And what's not on this chart is, if this is intended to be the size of the text represents the weighting of the answers, but the word computer would take up the entire screen, so it's actually in a slightly different color there. And so it's computer, and then everything else is really, really small. And that's the perception that Intel has of Intel. And of course, we're in a market that's kind of lost a lot of its excitement and sexiness. The second thing that's an environmental challenge for us is that our brand was in decline. And, you know, the data is pretty sobering. The good news is, overseas, the brand is doing very well, but in the United States, this is what it looks like. It's been on a multi-year decline in terms of relevance, as Apple and Samsung and other marketers and other brands have come in and really sort of seized the conversation. And so that's been a challenge for us. And then the third thing is this idea of mobile, which the chart I showed you with the smartphones and tablets and all that great growth. It's an incredibly crowded, very confusing market. And just to drive the point home, in the past year alone, there have been over 200 new brands that have entered the tablet market. One of the stories I like to tell is there's a customer that we deal with in Brazil that by day they make rice cookers, and then at night they retool everything and make tablets. It's a true story, and people do it all the time because they can. Those components can be bought on the market, it can be assembled, and they can be sold. And so it's a very, very crowded market, and everybody knows Apple with iPad and Samsung with Galaxy, and there's probably a few other names, maybe Google with Nexus. There's probably a few names that you might come up with, but the fact that it's such a crowded and saturated market is creating a lot of confusion and giving our competition a chance to come in and take mind share. So the question we asked is, in this environment, what we stand for and with our brand, do we even stand a chance? But the good thing is we have over the years built a brand that is powerful and stands for something. And it stands for something important. And just to give you one piece of research here, when you give people the option of having a device with Intel inside, the stated or the opinion of that device changes if they know that Intel is inside it, because they believe it's a brand that stands for quality and is something that is going to make the device better. And so that's the good news, and we need to build off of that heritage. So our approach. We went through, as all of you probably have done at some point in your careers, and looking at your brand, we did reams of research and did a lot of work, and we started to look at what is it that we really stand for? And what is it that we can build off of that's really authentic and genuine for the consumer? And that's not, and we've been guilty, as I know a lot of brands have been, of sponsoring things, and you put your name on something to try to attach meaning to it, and it just doesn't really work anymore. That, you slap your name on a car, or you put your name associated with a group or something, and if it's not a genuine partnership where both sides actually have the exact same goal, then it really doesn't fly. And so we looked at how we could reposition ourselves and then bring it to life in a way that's very meaningful, which you'll see here in just a minute. And we landed on, for many years, we used this position of sponsors of tomorrow. And what's interesting about sponsors of tomorrow, it's kind of an interesting catchphrase, but there's nothing unique and terribly authentic to Intel in relation to that. Really, any technology company in the world could claim to be the sponsor of tomorrow. So what's the unique reason why someone would associate Intel with this idea of sponsor of tomorrow? So as we looked at it, we realized there's one thing that we stand for that is very meaningful, and it's this idea of inside. And that inside is a very rich space for people, and that's what people know us for. We're Intel Inside. And so why have we gone away from that approach, and what can we do to bring back this idea of making inside important? So with our agency partners, we landed on this idea of look inside, because these are two simple words that really say so very much, in that it's what's inside that counts. And it opened up for us, actually it reopened up for us, a very fertile ground of creativity and opportunity to bring to life for consumers that it is in fact what's inside that counts. To help give you some perspective, we did a little piece that I want to share with you now that puts this notion of what's inside in its context. We did that piece to just kind of put in context the idea that it's not just about look inside your computers. It's about that it is what's inside really everything. It's what's inside each of us that's special and powerful, and it's what's inside the products you buy and so forth. And the litmus test we used to kind of come to this was we looked at a lot of other brands, and obviously these brands on the right, you know them all well, but there's something they have in common that we weren't executing on like we thought we should or could. The first is that they have this incredibly simple position, and as those of you in marketing know, simple is so hard. It's so incredibly hard. But they have all mastered the idea of something super simple in the minds of the consumer. They have something that's a special sauce. There's something unique and differentiated about each one of them that sets them apart and gives them a unique position that they can claim and own. They also bring a very strong emotional connection, give consumers a genuine reason to engage and care. And then last, what we love is that each of them has a call to action. Every time each one of those brands communicates with you, they're inviting you to take action, right? Nike can be speaking to the Olympic athlete, but they can also be speaking to that super overweight guy, that's potato chip guy on the couch. Just do it. There's an invitation every time. So we thought, why is it when we're communicating, why aren't we inviting consumers to take action every single time we communicate? And so we went through this and we found a position for us that's very simple. Look inside. It's very unique for us. It's something that has an emotional connection, which you'll see here in just a minute, and that it also employs a call to action. We're inviting everyone every time they engage with our brand to look inside themselves, look inside the products that they buy and interact with. And so to bring this to life, I'm going to ask Will here to kind of walk you through how we've positioned this and to show you some of the work, just to give you a sense of where we're transforming our brand and how it relates to this idea of greater good.
Thank you. So now I'm going to be the jerk that just shows work. No, I'm going to try to go through this quickly because I want to make sure that we get to Mick's story and Project Daniel, which is awesome and really embodies everything that we want this brand to be. One of the things, just to put it in context a little bit, that the Intel research group did is they invited a bunch of people in and had them kind of describe what it is they thought Intel did. And everyone, of course, knew that they're a big technology company. But at the end of the day, they kind of knew that they did microprocessors. They're in there somewhere in computers and devices. But beyond that, they couldn't really explain what it is. But when they were forced to answer that question, what they did was start to describe Intel as kind of the heart or the brain or the soul of the computer. So when forced to answer that question, they used really human terms to describe what Intel does. And that's great. That's a really cool latent connection to what the brand brings the world. So for us, light bulb kind of went off, and we said, wow, that's incredibly powerful on an emotional level. Everyone can relate to that thing inside you that you've got to dig inside and use in the face of adversity, or that's where you draw inspiration from. And so it's really kind of a cool human way to think about Intel's role within technology. So we came up with Look Inside, which is a global brand platform. And it works on a spectrum, so it's really pragmatic at times where we can kind of tell people to literally look inside the computer, but we're also building equity in that bigger notion that people can connect to on an emotional level. So I think that's where the power is. It's going to be the work that I'm going to show you is really celebrating that, what Intel is doing as a company, and the stories that we're celebrating across the world of people that do that out in the world. So the first piece is conflict-free, and I think this is important because it shows what Intel is doing as a company. We're not just out there celebrating other people doing stuff or trying to inspire people to do things, which we are doing, but we're also as a company acting on that.
This little microprocessor makes lives everywhere easier. But few people think about how they're made. Gold, tin, tantalum, and tungsten. These 4 minerals are in almost every piece of technology you own, so it's important to know where they come from. They can be mined by people enslaved by warlords in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Many of these miners hardly have access to a cell phone or laptop, yet they suffer unspeakable horrors because of them. I'm an Intel engineer, but more importantly, I'm a human being. I believe people should have a conflict-free choice. But 5 years ago, there wasn't a better way. So, my team and I created one. How do you separate the conflict minerals from the conflict-free minerals? The easy path would have been to source minerals from a safer region and just walk away. But you can't solve a problem by abandoning it. You have to start over by reconnecting the dots across the globe and convincing partners to do the right thing. Technology is supposed to solve problems and make lives everywhere easier. We're proud to say the world's first commercially available conflict-free microprocessors do just that.
And Girl Rising, this is a feature-length documentary that Intel produced about girls' education around the world. This was released on CNN, which premiered on CNN, and had a theatrical release around the world. This is a piece on adventure mountaineer Eric Weinmeier, and this is basically someone who looks inside himself on a daily basis in the face of adversity and overcomes great odds to do amazing in the world. So he's a big inspiration to other people.
Where's the limit? You don't reach the top of a mountain and think, that's it, I found it. I guess I'm done. Limits are funny that way. Once you go beyond something you thought was unreachable, the unreachable becomes what's next. At first, it was Mount McKinley. Then it was Kilimanjaro. Then it was Everest. I've come to realize the greatest discoveries aren't out here. They're inside you. I'm one of 118 people in history to have reached the top of all 7 summits. But I'm the only person to do it blind. I may not be able to see, but I can still show others what's possible.
Hey buddy, thanks for carrying my bag
And ICEF, Intel sponsors and runs an international science affair each year, which is actually huge. We could do a whole presentation on that alone. But it gets over 1,700 people from around the world, over 70 countries, high school kids, all bringing their independent research in front of a panel of judges, and they ultimately award over $5 million in awards and grants, and it's basically sponsoring the young minds of tomorrow, which is a pretty awesome event, which led to this guy, Jack and Draka, who is, again, just epitomizes what we want this brand to be and stand for in the world. He's a really special guy doing amazing things, and he won the 2012 ICEF Award.
The winner of the $75,000 2012 Gordon E. Moore Award in the category of Medicine and Health Sciences, Jack
Maybe if we'd caught it earlier. That's what the doctor said about my uncle's pancreatic cancer. Like that was even possible with the testing they had. But what did I know? I was too young to understand things like cancer, or how to test for it. Too young to be taken seriously. 199 experts told me I was too young, that they didn't have time for my little science fair project. But the way I saw it, if the key was early detection, maybe someone just needed to start looking earlier. Like during 5th period freshman biology.
Of course, one of the great things is not the press, but the fact that the world is kind of taking notice of Intel and reevaluating the brand in a new light. And with the attention that we bring to the brand and to these stories, hopefully that continues to propel these people and these initiatives on to do bigger and better things in the future. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mick Ebeling, who is a fucking inspiration. This guy, it just is, not giving him credit enough. But he does amazing things, and his work with Not Impossible Labs and Project Daniel is a perfect fit for what we want the brand to be and feel like. And he's awesome. So here you go.
Thanks, man. Hi, thanks. The intro, that's awesome. So this is about Project Daniel. I'll tell you guys a little bit about Project Daniel and some context, and then we'll get into some Q&A, because I think the work that these two guys and this team has done, I think in the face of advertising and all of the bureaucracy and all of the things that we're up against in advertising, the fact that they were able to get this work done, I think is so beyond commendable. It's magnificent. So I want to get into kind of the Q&A afterwards. But so Project Daniel, I want to start with, this is a quote that kind of drives us at Not Impossible. And it is this: it's, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, you build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And that's it. Not Impossible, that really is the context of everything that we do, because just baked into the name, Not Impossible, we're trying to take things that are impossible now and make them not impossible. Our lens that we look through in terms of how we tell stories is this context of help one, help many. If you think about the speakers that were up here earlier, think about what U2 and Bono has been able to do around poverty. Think about what Gates is able to do around malaria. You think about some of these things, and it's huge. It's overwhelmingly huge. And I think we as individuals, we as human beings, unless you come from that kind of net worth or that kind of an infrastructure where you can support doing things like that, it's hard to kind of have that connection to it. So what we do at Not Impossible is we focus on one story. We focus on one person. So the first thing we did was a thing called the Eye Writer, and it was around a paralyzed graffiti artist named Tempt. And this is about Daniel. And it's a little bit easier to talk about Daniel and Tempt than it is to talk about Africa or to talk about ALS. And so that's kind of the lens that we tell all of our stories through. And our driving kind of mantra is technology for the sake of humanity. And we're just looking for ways that the technology that we create is a way to kind of push humanity forward and not just something that's whimsical or something that's just for the now. So the whole story started for me because I went out to dinner with a guy who works for the X Prize, and he told me about this doctor. And the doctor's name was Dr. Katana. It's this guy right here. And Dr. Katana lives in the Nuba Mountains, and he's the only doctor within like a 1,500-mile radius supporting the people of the Nuba Mountains and a lot of the war that's going on there between North Sudan or Sudan and South Sudan. He had a boy who came in to his hospital, and it was this boy named Daniel. And Daniel was out tending his flocks, tending his herd of goats and cows, and a bomb was dropped overhead. He ran for cover. He wrapped his arm around a tree to kind of to protect himself. And when the bomb went off, the tree protected his body, but it blew his arms off. And so this is what Dr. Katana deals with on a daily basis. And so we decided after reading that story, it was one of those things. I came back at night and I opened it after having this conversation with this friend of mine. He's telling me about Dr. Katana, and I read the story and I open it up and I read about Daniel. And it wasn't one of those moments where that you could just read it and then grab a glass of water, close your computer, and go to bed, which we all do all the time. You read something and you just kind of move on. And so it was one of those moments for me of like, I just got to do something. I'm staring down the hallway where my boys are sleeping, and I couldn't imagine if that happened to one of my boys, if they had something like that happen to him. And one of the things that took me really in the gut is Daniel said when he woke up and realized that his arms were gone, he said, if I could die, I would, because now I'm going to be such a burden to my family. And I was like, holy crap, I couldn't imagine anybody that I knew or my kids having that feeling of desperation. So I was like, all right, we got to do something. So that was on July 11th. Fast forward to November. I hopped on a plane and went out to the Yida refugee camp. And Yida is one of the most challenging refugee camps in the world. And what I learned when I was coming into South Sudan is that there's some kind of mandate with the equivalent of the FAA in South Sudan, that they have to scare the shit out of everyone who comes and lands there by placing a couple crashed aircrafts on the side of the runway. Because every runway that I landed on, I had to land on 4, had planes like strewn like shrapnel on the side. And they weren't like little small planes that, just like a private pilot. They were big ass planes like this. That obviously someone had a lot of experience flying that. So I came into GITA, and this is where I met Daniel. And Daniel, the meeting of Daniel, the reading of that story, and kind of this whole experience is definitely one of those moments that is by far and always will change my life.
I don't believe that you can fix someone. That was never my goal here. Daniel was 14 when the bomb hit. Hiding behind a tree saved his life. But after losing both of his arms, he said he wished it hadn't. He had lived 2 years without arms. Daniel is just one of over 50,000 amputees left in the wake of the bloodiest war Africa has ever known. The plan was to go to Sudan and 3D print prosthetic arms for Daniel. But that was just the beginning. We wanted to leave his village with the tools and knowledge of how to create these prosthetics long after we had gone.
This is going to be the hand that we work on for Daniel.
I still pinch myself the fact that I was able to teach a group of people to print. Many who had never worked with computers before and never seen a 3D printer before, and I taught them how to make arms. That's what technology has the potential to do. I have a process. And the process is you commit, and then you figure out how the heck you're going to do it. The second I saw the story about Daniel, I didn't need to reread it. When you look at a picture of a boy with bandaged stump arms, I mean, what do? Do you just, oh, that's too bad, and close the computer and go to bed? What do? You can't put the pieces back together in someone else's life. But maybe if we print them new pieces, they'll start to learn to put them back together themselves.
So this is that moment. This is actually the moment that Daniel fed himself for the first time. We were playing around and we were playing with kind of the ergonomics and the physiology of the arm, and so we were testing it out. This is the shed that we were camped in over in Yida camp. And a funny story about this. So that bowl right there is, we were trying to play around with the angle and the angle of the spoon and the angle of the arm. And so I was like, hey, quick, let's get a bowl of something, anything. So they came back and they had this bowl, this huge heaping bowl of brown sugar. And so he was playing with it and we were figuring it out. And I was like, yeah, go ahead, take a bite. And so we'd take a bite and then take another bite. And we did that for a couple minutes and all of a sudden he started to get really jittery. And we're like, holy cow, we just pinned this guy on sugar for the first time in his life. So one of the things that I learned through this experience was, and you can see, so I'm sitting here diligently making these arms, and Daniel and Shockey are doing what all boys do, which is playing video games. And it was to me, it was really amazing to see, because you know, the seriousness of what we were doing, it was a serious mission, and there was a lot of intensity around it. And these guys were literally, every second that I wasn't fitting Daniel, they would take the tablet back and they'd start to play the game. And right here, this is a perfect example. Shockey's taking the game, and Daniel would like bap him with his stump of his arm and give it back to me. And then I would say, hey, Daniel, come over here. We're going to do the arm. And if anybody has kids, you know exactly what what I'm about to do. I'd be like, you know, here, put the game down and come here for a second. And he'd be like, and he'd put his arm out, and I'd fit it, and I would do it. I'm like, are you? So So it really, like, that was a great revelation to me, that it doesn't matter where you're from, color of your skin, whatever. Like, you truly, if you're 16 years old, this is who you are as a human being. So part of this was not to just go out, and we joked about it a lot beforehand, is not to kind of go out and be what someone kind of epitomized as the white savior, which is a lot of NGOs go out there and they do something, they take some pictures, they come back, and then they promote it, and then that's it. But to actually do something that you can go back and then have them continue on. So for us, this is about teaching a man to fish. And this is about passing something on so it can continue long after we left. And so when I got there, Dr. Tom had kind of amassed these group of young men within his hospital who were going to be the people who would carry this on. So we went through this process of teaching them. And it was an incredible experience because they'd never, as we said in the spot, they'd never seen, some of them had seen laptops before, but nobody had ever seen a 3D printer before. Like this thing that actually manufactured stuff out of plastic. This was a gods must be crazy kind of moment that just dropped out of the sky. So them going through and understanding it, understanding kind of the intricacy of it. And Kevin talked about how hard it is to simplify. The simplification of what this was supposed to do and what it actually accomplished was an absolutely beautiful thing. And probably one of the highlights of the entire trip was actually, it took me 4 days to get from the Nuba Mountains. That was, by the way, the ceasefire ended while I was there, so it became an active war zone while we were actually there. So it took us 4 days to get out of the mountains, to get back to LA. And when I got back to LA, I pulled out my phone and turned it on. And this is what I kind of was hit with, were these pictures of arms that were made while I was in the air by the team back in Sudan and in the Nuba Mountains. So I'm walking through the airport in this post 9/11 world, and I'm walking through and I'm like, woo! Just going like this, and people are kind of staring at me like, what the hell is this guy up to? But that was probably, I would say, one of the highlights of the whole thing, that knowing that I had left the building and this thing was still continuing on. And when we launched this in January at CES with Intel and Venables, they would be making about an arm a week at the time, which was just awesome. So I want to leave you guys with a couple things. This is all kinds of press. The press went crazy on this thing, which was really fun to see, and a lot of the kind of the heart of what the story was about this and what we were trying to do, I think really came across. And this is why we looked at a lot of sponsors on this, and we were very intrepid. And Will tell you, when we were having these conversations, I was like, man, what we're doing, I don't want this to be kind of like a product placement spot, where you're, double mint gum and a ding. It had to be something that was really authentic to what we were doing. And this concept of look inside and what these guys created was so just genuine to what we wanted to do. And for us, as back to the kind of the teach a man to fish thing, this wasn't about just doing it, celebrating it, telling the story, but it was about looking inside and seeing like what else can be done and what else can happen. So for us, back to that concept of kind of looking inside and helping one and helping many. This is a quote that we also really look at, which is, the problems of the world cannot be solved by skeptics or cynics whose horizons are limited by the obvious realities. We need people who can dream of things that never were and ask, why not? And for us at Not Impossible, we try to modify that slightly, which is, we don't want to ask, why not? We want people to see things that never were and ask, who? Who is that one person? Who is that one person that you can help? Who is that Daniel in your life that you guys can actually do it here? And I think the power of marketing is so powerful, like Drucker's quote. He's the business guru of our time, and he calls out marketing as one of the most important things in business. The people assembled in this room, you have the lightsaber of the world in your hand right now if you're able to tell the right stories, if you're able to do those things that can empower other things to do it. So the question I ask everybody here, and the question I would want everybody to ask their friends and their friends and their friends is, who is your Daniel? And who is the Daniel in your life that you can change? Because we're not trying to cure cancer, we're not trying to cure malaria, we're not trying to solve poverty, but if you can help one person in your life and everybody does that, you don't have to be a mathematician to figure out what that causes kind of on a global level. Please help one, help many. Thank you, guys.
So wait, let me get this right. You swear at me and you swear for him. I'm lost in that equation. So, there. Do we have any questions? Yeah.
Yep. So the question is, what's Daniel up to today? It's a good question. It's a slightly emotional question right now because Daniel, up to, since I left, he was using his arm. We got him back into school. We kind of got him into a situation that can kind of foster him growing. And he moved back to Goodell, which is the area that the hospital was in, because that's kind of where his family was from. But on May 1st and 2nd, which was, I think, Saturday and Sunday, the hospital, Mother Mercy Hospital, was bombed 11 times by the government of Sudan. So it was a hospital, and I haven't actually statistically proven this yet, but I don't even think Hitler bombed hospitals. So I don't know what's up with Daniel right now. I do know that Dr. Tom is okay, but it blew up. They actually dropped it on the hospital grounds, but he is okay. And there were casualties, but there was no deaths due to the bombing. So I don't know yet. The fact that he said that there's no deaths, I'm hoping that reigns true for Daniel, who lives slightly off the hospital grounds. And so, not to bring that on a down note, it's a reality note. But if you go to Nuba Reports, spread that, tweet that, Facebook that. People don't know that. People should know that. And that by a simple act of social media, everybody in this room, however many people are here, could actually spread the word about something like that. And then other people would look inside and figure out what they might be able to do.
Yeah. There's a mic right there coming.
What inspired you to do what you're doing right now?
The fact that we can. The fact that we have this means. We have the means to tell these stories to inspire other people, and we have technology at our disposal that can do anything. There was a story that I read about a guy who had his fingers cut off. He was a carpenter. He cut his fingers off, and he couldn't afford a prosthetic. So he made his own, and he made it for less than $100. So I was like, well, if that guy can do it and Daniel lost his arm, let's put them together. And through technology, you can do things like that now.
Yeah, there's a mic. Oh, coming right there.
It's an amazing project that you guys are working on. What does the government of Sudan think about what you're doing there? I mean, does anybody support you there, or is this just something that you're doing completely on your own? Are there other countries that are acknowledging what you're doing there and then thinking, this is something that we need to get behind?
Well, as Americans, we're all predisposed of being horrible at geography and slightly pretty horrible at history as well. And I was, before I actually got there, didn't totally understand the landscape. But you have Sudan, and you now have South Sudan. And Sudan is home to one of the most recent popular atrocities of our time, which is Darfur. That's where the atrocity of Darfur took place. And so the same president that committed the atrocities of Darfur is the same president who bombed Dr. Tom this last weekend. So the government of Sudan, I'm sure I'm not very welcome there. But in South Sudan, they have their own strife. So you basically have these people, the Nuba Mountains, who are kind of like left out to dry and are hanging out there. So there's not a lot of support from a governmental standpoint. And that's why we look to the most, as far as I'm concerned, and a lot of people would argue, the most powerful entities in the world, which are corporations. Corporations have the ability to permeate where governments cannot. So that's why, and I'm not paid to say this at all, but I couldn't have thought of a better partner than Intel on this, just because of what they stand for. Not just the essence of what this whole campaign was about, but the fact that you're able to go and do. I didn't know about the conflict-free thing until they announced it at CES, and I was like, that's the power of a corporation, way more than what a government can do.
So actually for Intel, very interesting promotion or campaign. Look inside, it's really touched the people's heart for all marketing campaign. But people invest of the branding itself is not profit right away you can get.
Right.
So how effectively this whole campaign actually affect to company-wise branding, like benefit or what profit you guys get? How
Yeah.
much, I mean, how fast you guys get profit fast?
Well, that is a great question and something we wrestle with, as you know. I work for a company that's incredibly logical. They're very rational. They're founded by, run by, and spirited by engineers. And there are a lot of detractors internally, to be honest. They want to see hard-hitting, product-oriented messaging and advertising that talks about features and capabilities. And, you know, so the debate has always been, for us, we know that we can do that type of work, and we've spent a lot of time with Will and his team on this, but we also know that it doesn't resonate very well. And so it's fairly new, so we have to give it a little bit of time. But so far, what we've been able to see is we haven't tied it back directly to sales yet, but we have tied it back to purchase consideration. And we've seen pretty dramatic increases in pre and post in terms of purchase consideration. So we view that as a very positive thing. We look at how effective these types of stories play. And you know, whether it's through the traditional metrics of recognition and brand linkage and all the things that you measure and care about in an advertising space. But at the end of the day, for me, it's a challenge because there is a pretty strong pushback internally on, yeah, but you're not out there talking about my product, right? I want to talk about my product. Now, the good news is, you know, like for example, the conflict-free piece, our CEO is 100% behind that. So it's authentic. So we're not out there smoke and mirrors, right? We truly do that work and we stand behind it. And so that we found to be something that's very powerful because he sees that and he personally is behind it and he's like, okay, that's awesome, right? Let's go do that, right? Let's put that on TV. And so that gives us license now to do some of these other stories. Yeah. So for us, it's been a journey of what is it that's special and unique and truly genuine about the brand, and then how do we tell those stories? And some are going to work better than others. I mean, our CEO didn't really like the Jack Andreka piece, which we think is amazing, right? But he didn't really like it because it really had not a whole lot to directly do with Intel. So that's where the logical, rational engineering mindset kicks in. So we have to help with that.
I think you have to look at the big picture. You're seeing kind of, you know, some of the more emotional brand building elements, but there is a big ecosystem, and we do kind of have retail-driven product stuff within the mix, and so the whole system works as a whole. But you know, it's incredibly important to build a brand that people can relate to, that has power and resonates on an emotional level. If we just stuck with product benefits and speeds and feeds and kind of rational reasons to buy your product, it's not going to do anything for you. It may get people in the store, and they may get people in the short term to pick up the product and buy it, but without kind of that bigger brand promise and something that people believe in, and you know, it's an age-old question, but the best brands in the world build brands over time and continue to invest in that and build equity in a bigger idea. So it's a combination of both things. You know, I think you need the big kind of emotional brand presence that connects all the way down, you know, to retail. So it's kind of working all the levers together at once, I think.
Great question, though.
I actually have a question for you guys. You guys avert your eyes so that it's totally unbiased. Based on what you guys just saw, and if you had to make a purchasing decision and you went into and it was something that had an Intel processor versus another processor, after what you just saw, you guys are the perfect focus group. How many, raise your hand, would actually make a decision based on Intel? Okay, you guys open your eyes. Oh, you open your eyes.
Let's take a picture of that.
To me, it's like kind of basic. To me, it's pretty basic math. I'm sure there's lots of bureaucracy that you guys have to just like forage through with machetes, but to me, that's a pretty basic assumption that that's what's going to drive it.
Yeah. Yeah. More on.
So all the causes that you showed us today kind of like seem to take the brand in a whole new direction, which is really positive. And I'm just wondering, like, before all these causes popped up, what was the breaking point where you're like, we have to, you know, hit restart and start over with our messaging and go with this look inside? Like, how do you know, like, we have to try something new?
Well, for me, when I've been in this role about 2.5 years, and when we came in, it was very obvious. I mean, we looked at research, right? How is our advertising working, and how is the brand? And you saw the data on the brand, right? And so we saw a lot of data that just said something's not right. And we were clearly in this transactional space. We just product du jour, do an ad about that product and hope it works, right? So I just felt like we were exploring with these guys around what is that message platform? What is that thing that allows us to just continue to tell great stories and it's not constantly switching out? And that's what we were doing. We were changing out our creative identity. We were changing out the messaging. And as you know, marketing is about, I tell this people all the time, marketing, if you break it down, it's about a simple message that's repeated. And if you can do that well, find a really simple message and repeat it in this world of, remember, 10 years ago, the average consumer got about 2,500 messages a day. Today, it's over 5,000. So how is it that we can break through and actually grab some real estate in the mind of a consumer is through a very simple message that you repeat effectively, right? And so we came across this thing around, oh my gosh, this idea of inside is so rich and so powerful, and we've owned it, and yet we haven't been watering the garden. And so we looked at where we were, and then we realized that we have this absolute jewel in front of us. Let's go reactivate that jewel. And then, again, it was an interesting decision to make, but it wasn't until some of the first work started coming back, and you were like, holy crap. That's just, I remember the first time I showed my boss the Eric piece. The Eric blind hiker piece was the first one we did. And it was just like, she swore out loud. She was just blown away, right? So that's when we realized, and now what you're seeing and what Will said, what's interesting is regardless of where we are sort of in the purchase journey for a consumer, whether it's sort of retail and more hard-hitting versus more brand building, more emotional, we found something that stretches and allows us to tell stories through people. And it can be very emotional, a la Project Daniel, or it can be something about our product. But we can tell it through the lens of people and how it impacts people's lives. And we've got 1,000 ideas for the next decade. That's what's beautiful about it. And we're very excited and hopeful that this remains in force and that we don't. One of our problems as a brand, to be frank, is we're very impatient. We don't like it, switch it. Right? Oh, this doesn't work, fire that person. It's just we're just very transactional, and I'm pushing hard to get us into a space of patience, longevity, consistency, because ultimately that will win. I believe. Anything else?
Yep.
One more, yeah.
Speaking of branding, with all the possibilities you guys, they're almost infinite, but when you have a finite marketing budget, my question is, and Will, you may know because you have more of these conversations than you guys do, but feel free to. In the context of a 30-second television commercial, what's the conversation? What's the relevance now? And maybe for the future, if you just give a few thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think what we'd like to do in the future is do longer format pieces. Try to do 60s big events, maybe even 90s, and rather than trying to spread out your chips and just scatter them everywhere. We like the high impact approach and do less of it, but do it in a big important way. And then the way we've been kind of structuring the release of this content is we'll run something on television, and then we've got kind of the online pieces, the longer format piece, some interactive stuff. So it is a 1-2 punch. We kind of get the ball rolling with broadcast because it is a big megaphone. But then rely a lot on social media. These stories are inherently social. People like spreading things that are doing stories about people doing great things in the world, and so they're inherently social. It's not like you're trying to force an ad into this viral place. So I think the good thing is that they're social in nature, and the idea would be to buy media that honors these stories and doesn't have to shortchange them. So we'd like to rely more on high impact kind of media placements rather than big broad 30 buys.
And by the way, just to be frank and honest, I've lost that battle internally. Again, back to the point about rational, logical, right? There's this notion of reach and frequency and all the things that happens, and the more 30s you get, the more reach and frequency. So we're still struggling with that, when in reality, to me, there's a difference between efficiency and effectiveness. And we, as a brand, have struggled to find that balance. And I'm firmly in the camp of you want to go own any one of these spots on the Super Bowl. I think we would have owned the social conversation. I really do. That's not I just think if you'd have put that in these big tentpole things, a 90-second spot about Jack Andreka or about Project Daniel and Not Impossible Labs and how the technology underneath enabled these stories to happen, I think would be incredibly powerful. So we're still fighting that fight internally. I think we're over time, so if there's no more questions. Oh, one quick one? Okay, we'll do one more. And if anybody has to leave, please don't hesitate. Go ahead. We don't want to feel bad.
Yeah, there's a prediction in theory of Moore's law. By 2050, the exponential growth of computers, it will outtake human intelligence. So in regards to technology changing the world, what's your next step for technology improving humanity?
Well, for us, we still believe, obviously, as you said, Moore's law still has, we don't have to explain Moore's law, but it's the idea of how microprocessors and semiconductors in general, they continue, the transistors that go in them continue to get built smaller and smaller and smaller, which gives you lower cost, lower power consumption, and higher performance, believe it or not. It's an amazing function of the business model. There's still at least a decade more of that in place, and then at some point, yes, we're down to the size of atoms in terms of how big these transistors are. So at some point it will run out, but we still have a lot to do. But it's not just semiconductor cost reduction to enable these types of things, but what you're seeing is the democratization of technology in ways never done before. I mean, literally, there's a story that you're going to see coming out of the agency in the next few months about a man whose life was changed because they were able to map his human DNA, his genome. That used to be, 5 years ago, that was a $10 million prospect, and it took a year plus for one person. It's now down, because of Moore's law, we've now gotten this down to under a week and about $1,000. And it's going to continue to go down to the point where every one of you at some point in your life will have your DNA mapped, to the point where you can have personal, truly personal prescribed healthcare for your DNA map. And so the ability to tell those stories and how cancer is being cured and all these breakthroughs are happening, we still have so much of that left to go. But there's also the idea of how software and sensors and all these other technologies can come in to create, again, great experiences for people and to democratize this idea of technology improving lives. So there's almost an endless array of capability ahead of us. And by the way, the things that we can't see beyond, there's going to be, we've always said we could see about 10 years out, and that's what we can see today. But the things we're going to discover in the next 10 years will open up an entirely new set of avenues that we don't see today. That's how technology works. I think we're done. Anyway, thank you for having us.
Thank you.